So, hello, welcome. This is my first bit of free time since some really exciting news on Monday. We're about 48 hours after the release of the exciting news that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine has proved itself to be very, very effective. We now have three, arguably four effective vaccines, but a lot of misreporting going on, which is why I wanted to put this video out as an update to the COVID series of videos that I started back during the main lockdown. So hopefully what I'm going to do in this video is put into context some of the numbers you've been hearing in the news about how effective or not vaccines actually are. Okay, so it's going to be a quick run through that. We're not going to answer every single question. There's more videos to come. So let's have a look then. We've got four vaccines now that allegedly work, three that are sort of credible and you might ever come across. One is called the Moderna vaccine, one is the Pfizer vaccine, one is the so-called Sputnik 5 vaccine in Russia, and one is the Oxford AstraZeneca. Now, each of these have got two names. First thing to say, those two names represent the research group who produced them, and of course then the distributor, the manufacturer and distributor. So Moderna, Pfizer and AstraZeneca are big pharmaceutical companies who are going to be doing the manufacture and distribution of these vaccines. Oxford, of course, was the research group in the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. For Pfizer, it is a German research group who put that together, and Moderna I think was in-house, but I'm not sure. And the Sputnik 5 was a government-funded Russian vaccination. Okay, so these two here are what we call RNA vaccines, okay, and these two here are modified virus vaccines. Basically two different ways of achieving the same thing. If you want to know a bit more about how vaccination works, you can see some other videos on this YouTube channel. So all the information I'm giving you today is basically coming from the press releases from these four groups as best I can. A bit more tricky for the Sputnik 5, but there's some useful articles in Nature that I've been referencing, and I will put all my reference materials into the description so you can follow up on those. So what I'm trying to do is basically cut through a lot of the, should we say, media underreporting of the actual science of what is going on. So this is the big question. How effective are they? And a lot of numbers have been coming out in the news, and to me, they seem a little bit poorly reported. Certainly the BBC over the last 48 hours has changed its tune an awful lot about how they report the efficacy, particularly of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. And in fact, when Oxford AstraZeneca released their findings and their bottom line number of their efficacy, their share price fell, which was a wild misunderstanding of what was going on. So I'm going to try and explain to you how we get to these numbers in terms of the 95%, 70%, whatever percent efficacy of a vaccine. Okay, so this is what you do in a large-scale vaccine trial. You get a lot of people and you vaccinate them all. Unbeknown, so there's a large number of people, it's got to be many thousands of people, okay, and unbeknown to the experimenters, half of them get a saline injection, just a placebo dummy infection, and half of them, here represented in green, get the real experimental vaccine. Okay, so for Pfizer, this was 43,000 people in total. For Oxford AstraZeneca, it was 20,000 people. For Moderna, it was around 30,000 people. For Sputnik, it was about 16,000 people. Okay, got this vaccine. Obviously, the bigger the sample, the better. And what you do with those people once you've given them is you basically just let them go about their daily life. So you give them these vaccines. The people doing the vaccinating don't know whether they're getting the placebo or the real deal. Neither do the people who have had the vaccinations. So nobody knows. This is a blinded trial. And you set a number, right? You go, right, we're going to leave this experiment running until, X hundred people get the virus. And then when we know those people, we're going to open the magic envelope, look inside the envelope and see who is in which group, right? So basically, at this point, you've just got to wait for time to pass. Okay, so you release people back into the population and they circulate through the population. Okay, now this was done over a range of countries. Pfizer, it was the USA, Brazil, various parts of Europe. I think they used Turkey as well. Lots of places, variety of places. The bigger variety you can get, the better. AstraZeneca were Britain and Brazil. The other two, not quite sure, but they were certainly international as well. I think the Russian one might have just been in Russia. Okay, and then After a certain amount of time has elapsed, cases of COVID will start to pop up, okay, like this. And you wait and you wait and you wait until your number that you predetermined has been reached, okay? So in this case, out of this population, my predetermined number might be 5. Once we reach that magic number of 5 cases, okay, then we open the envelope and see who out of that group was in the actual vaccination group and who was in the placebo group and got the dummy injection, okay? So the calculation then goes like this, okay? Now, in that experiment, the threshold was only 5 people, right? Because I couldn't be bothered to animate anymore. Obviously, it's going to be an awful lot more in a real study. So, turns out in that case, 4 out of 5 of them were in the placebo group and 1 out of 5 was in the vaccine group. Therefore, 20% of the people, right, we can reason 1 in 5 were unprotected by the vaccine, therefore 80% efficacy. Okay, so it's a simple percentage calculation based on those people who had the vaccine and got the virus versus all the people who got the virus. Okay, so that's how the calculation works, and that's where we get this number. Now, you might be surprised to know that out of 43,000 for Pfizer, 20,000 for AstraZeneca, 30,000 for Moderna, 16,000, that number is quite low. Okay, that number, that threshold where we open the envelope and have a look, is actually remarkably low. So, there are obvious issues, however, with this as well, right? First off, your sample size. Now, you might have noticed 43,000 to 16,000 is quite a range. Okay, it's almost the Pfizer study was almost 3 times the size of the Russian study, right? So that's an obvious issue. Sample size is an issue. Also, the threshold that you set yourself for opening the envelope, right? That sample is a problem. Now, obviously, over the summer, we managed to suppress the virus in this country quite well by having our lockdown, which got the virus numbers quite low, right? Which means that that's good because people aren't catching the virus, but it also means fewer people in the study are catching the virus, so it takes longer to then get to the point of opening the envelope. Okay, not that this wasn't a remarkably speedy endeavour by all concerned; it absolutely was. Okay, so sample location is important. So AstraZeneca went for the UK and Brazil. Now, Brazil obviously quite a smart choice, very different in terms of its demographics, its wealth, its population to the UK, and also thinking cynically, it was affected. It still is affected appallingly by COVID due to the rash actions of the Bolsonaro-run government, which had not been very good at locking down, and obviously not practical there where you've got extreme poverty in millions and millions of people. Okay, so sample location is important, and obviously you can read, if you get the papers, the justification of why the sample sites that were picked. Point is, for each vaccine they are different, right? The level of symptoms. Now, what counts as a case? Now, a lot of them, if you listen and read the press releases and listen further into the detail, say, well, yes, we got this many cases, but we got no cases of serious disease. That is fantastic. Well, that's absolutely brilliant. If you've got no serious disease out of your group of people who got cases, that is a result. So even if they did get infected, right, if the disease was brought from potentially lethal down to something less serious than a flu, a standard seasonal flu or a cold, that's also a result, even though they would count as a case in your study. Okay, so mitigation of symptoms also has to be considered. Right? Then, of course, does it work across all the age groups? Age, ethnicity, gender. Obviously, really, what we're doing here is we're training the immune system. So the ability, the competency of your immune system is really what decides whether this vaccine works or not, rather than the vaccine itself. Okay? So this can be affected by all sorts of things. Your other health, other health information. Does it work across the ages? Of course, we know COVID targets the elderly, always worse outcomes in the elderly. So do these vaccines work well across the age groups? And turns out, in terms of antibody response, actually these vaccines have worked remarkably consistently from children to old people. So that's good. Okay. Basically, as I tell my students from year 7 to year 13, we're going for representative data. Whatever you do, it has to be justifiably representative, right? But all that context, all that important information just gets stripped away when you hear the basic reporting of the vaccines. All this important information that you need to know to assess and to judge that bottom line figure gets absolutely stripped out. Okay, so really important lesson: don't obsess over the number. Context is important, and as it says there, 100% of Mr. Gills in this video approve this message. Okay, right, so let's look at the vaccines side by side and try and put some of that context back in for the numbers. So the source for this, as I say, is all the press releases I could find from the various research groups, which obviously, if they're coming from Pfizer and AstraZeneca and Moderna, they are companies, they're going to want to put the best possible spin on it. I've also looked at the articles in Nature assessing the various reliability of these vaccines. Okay, obviously this is very recent, all very recent science, and I'm more than happy to be corrected if any of these figures are not correct, but this is the best that I could find in the time allowed. Right, full teaching days don't allow for much gathering of information. Okay, so the quoted efficacy is there at the top: 95% for Pfizer, 95% for Moderna, 92% for Sputnik, and either 70 or 90, depending on which injection regime you followed, for the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. Okay, now you probably will have heard the 70% figure, but it turns out that if you give a half dose followed by a full dose of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, it leads to 90% efficacy, and no one knows why. Okay, that's yet to be found out. So as I said, Pfizer, 43,000 people. The number of cases initially when they announced was slightly lower than 170, so you might have noticed their efficacy kind of went up. It went from 90% up to 95%, because they initially announced at a lower number than that, just below 100, and then they announced at 170 cases, and within that 170 cases, turns out only 8 of them were in the vaccinated group. So only 8 vaccinated people with the Pfizer vaccine got coronavirus out of 170, which is where our 95% figure comes from. Okay, so going on to Moderna, same sort of thing. They were a smaller study. They declared at 95 cases out of 30,000. Okay, out of those, 90 people were unvaccinated and 5 were vaccinated. So it's 5 out of 95. 5 out of 95, so that's around the 95% mark. Now, Sputnik one, you might notice, is quite dubious because they declared at 20 cases, which certainly Nature and a lot of people, and I agree, are commenting that's not really enough to get that number. Okay, so 2 people out of 20 got the disease with this Sputnik vaccination, as that's 92% efficacy. But you can see, can we rely on that 92% number as much as we can rely on Pfizer's 95% number? And the answer is, well, probably not, because the sample size is so much smaller. Okay, for Oxford AstraZeneca, 131 people got cases of coronavirus. 30 of them were in the vaccinated group, and 101 were in the unvaccinated group, placebo group. However, there is this distinction between those that got the half dose followed by the full dose and those who got full dose, right? So from that simple calculation there, the numbers presented, you get to approximately 70%. And then obviously if you take into account only the ones that got the half then the full, that rises to 90%. Okay, so that's the context. So no, but you will have presumably just seen 95% versus 70%. And really, when you look at those numbers, we are looking at less than a class of people making this massive difference in the percentage numbers. So percentages of small numbers are notoriously unreliable, right? So that's the important context. So there are, of course, other factors to consider when you're talking about vaccinating people. Side effects, efficacy, mitigation of symptoms, all that kind of stuff. And can you actually get the vaccine, right? You've probably heard, and this has been reported, that the Pfizer vaccine, because it is this fancy new RNA technology, RNA being quite unstable, needs to be stored at a very, very low temperature. And if you want to know a bit more about the RNA structure, DNA RNA structure, there are other videos on this channel you can look at. So -80 to -70. Now, the UK government has ordered 10 million doses of that, and you need 2 doses spaced apart a bit to get the level of protection that Pfizer say is 95%. So that's 5 million people, right, who could be vaccinated with that. The manufacturing site is going to be the USA and indeed in Belgium, and it's a new technology. And with all this supply chain stuff, the cost of this vaccine is higher than the cost of some more traditional technologies. Okay, I say traditional, the other two do involve genetic engineering, which can hardly be described as traditional, but still, this is a very, very new technology, RNA vaccinations. So Moderna, there it is, 95%. -4 to -2. I found differing numbers on this in various sources. -4 to -2 was on a Moderna document that was released. However, some reports have said it's going to be closer to the same as Pfizer's, -80 to -70. So there was a mixture of reports there, right? That's going to be manufactured in the USA and Switzerland. It's still the same sort of higher cost technology, but the UK government has not ordered any of that and are scrabbling to do so at time of recording. So that basically is one I think you're unlikely to get. Sputnik, I think you're unlikely to get as well, because that one I don't think is coming out of Russia, so I don't think that the cost is going to be relevant. Again, couldn't find a huge amount of information on that. Right, dig a little bit deeper, maybe we can find some more information over the coming weeks. Okay, but this one, storable at 4 degrees C because it is a modified virus, like the Oxford AstraZeneca. Again, I don't think the UK government's ordered any of that because of the relationship between the West and Russia at the moment. The Oxford AstraZeneca one, right, is storable in a fridge, 4 degrees C, like most vaccinations we currently use. It's going to be manufactured in the UK, and I read a document about a plan to produce in India, right, which obviously is going to be very useful because those crowded areas, and this vaccine is being described as a vaccine for the world, right, because of that storage temperature and the ease of production and the fact the cost is quite low. So once you've made the virus, the modified virus, it's actually quite cheap to produce it. Okay, and the UK has already ordered 100 million doses, which we manufactured here. Okay, and that was obviously going to be quite good, right? And that manufacture is already happening, right? AstraZeneca started doing this well before the trial data came in, on the hope, which turned out to be correct, that this vaccine will prove effective. So, you often hear now, if you've listened over the last couple of days to representatives of Oxford and AstraZeneca, describing this as a vaccine for the world because of its low cost and easy storage. Now, this storage thing and this transport thing matters. It really matters, okay? I think you can probably all guess why it matters, especially seeing as the other one's being manufactured in Belgium, needs to maintain a minus 80 degree cold chain in terms of transport, is unlikely to be with us this side of Christmas, and after the new year there may well be due to an incredible act of self harm and stupidity by the UK government, massive queues of lorries in Kent. And if you've got a minus 80 refrigerated lorry, there's only so long that it can sit in queues like that before they get to your surgery and into your arm. Okay, so not impossible to do this in terms of cold chain, but there's some obvious, really big and largely self-inflicted hurdles for the Pfizer vaccine. Okay, as far as the Oxford AstraZeneca one goes, big, and this is sort of has been for months and months my bet on what would actually end up going into your arm, regardless of what everybody else was doing. This is probably the one that we will all get. Okay, it's here, it's in this country, right? It's stable, right? It's stable at 4 degrees, so it can work like any other vaccine that your surgeries, your doctors, your nurses are already very experienced at giving out, right? It's long lasting, right? Because of that stability, it's got a long shelf life, so it's not going to go off very easily. It's already been ordered in bulk, okay? And there's this thing about the 90% of efficacy of half dose then full dose, which may well turn out to be the vaccine schedule that gets chosen when it comes to actually delivering this into you. Okay, so that's a big advantage, and I still think, really, unless you are an elderly person in a care home watching this, which if so, hello, thank you very much, I think this is the one you're going to get, probably not the Moderna or the Pfizer. Right, so you need to take it, basically, right? We've heard a lot of talk about this thing called herd immunity, and I love this graphic, right, because it shows what happens to people at 0% population vaccinated, 25%, 50%, 75%, 90%, 95%. Now, people talk about herd immunity, just letting, oh, well, if everybody else has the vaccine, then I don't have to because herd immunity. What they fundamentally forget to think about there is they are the herd, right? You and me and everybody else, we are the herd, right? You need to take this vaccine. Now, if you look at the top one there, 95%, right, that obviously has a few unvaccinated people in the population. Those are people that medically can't take vaccines due to immune deficiencies recovering from diseases like leukemia that will affect their white blood cell production, so on and so forth, right? For the sake of them, the rest of us have to take this vaccine if it is offered, okay? And our 70%, even if it is as low as 70%, which is not low for a vaccine, as we'll see in just a moment, right? The rest of us have to take it, right? There is no ifs, no buts about that, right? And if you want to come at me with your anti-vaxxer stuff, feel free, you are wrong, right? So, other vaccines for comparison, you might think that 70%, if true, is low, right? Well, actually, these are the routine vaccines you might get from the doctors, and this is all from the NHS website and from Lancet reviews, meta-analyses of the efficacy of commonly prescribed vaccines. Hepatitis B is 80%. MMR, one of our most effective vaccines, again, it is, deal with it, right? MMR, 93% for measles, 78% for mumps, and 97% for rubella. And that vaccine has been in development for 40 years. So, of course, it's reached those high levels. But for mumps, still only 78%, right? Malaria, which is in phase 3 trials at the moment, World Health Organization reports 39% efficacy. Very unlikely to get that licensed anytime soon, okay? Tetanus, which again you have to have boosters of quite regularly, pretty normal vaccine, 80% efficacy. Typhoid, which you get if you go travelling to anywhere tropical or exotic, 72% initially, drops to 50% after 3 years, okay, as a standard travel vaccine. So these are the kind of numbers that we're talking about. And then when we look at seasonal flu, a meta-analysis in the Lancet in 2012 suggested that seasonal flu vaccines, on average, are 67% effective at preventing flu. But the government still sees fit to pay for them, still encourages everyone to take them, because that 67% reduction in disease and then symptom mitigation for the other 33%, right, are very, very much worth having. So the 95% for Pfizer and Moderna are obviously off the charts, fantastic results, especially in the time they've had. But that is abnormally high for vaccinations. And to think otherwise is a misunderstanding of how vaccines work. Okay? So, in conclusion, to finish off, the Pfizer, Moderna and the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine all work. The Sputnik vaccine may work, we just don't have enough information yet to decide whether those numbers are reliable or not. So it may well work. Really irrelevant probably to you because we're unlikely to get that one. Okay? This really is an amazing achievement by all concerned. Okay? Vaccine production development often takes 10 years, and this has been reduced to 10 months. So all those concerned and all the groups have done astonishing work, and it really is a testament to the efficacy of modern science. Right? Absolutely fantastic. And this is why I got into biology in the first place, for this kind of thing. Right? Now, obviously you're hearing an awful lot from our government about how it's a fantastic British achievement, it's a British thing, British science, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, sure, Oxford University is a fantastic institution, but it is populated by the best scientists from around the world, regardless of their nationality, right? So talking about vaccine nationalism is pointless. COVID doesn't care where you're from. So in terms of vaccine production, vaccine distribution, I really hope we can avoid vaccine nationalism and work together to get everybody vaccinated, because that's the only way we're going to end the pandemic. Okay? I think, and I still think, and I've been saying this for months, the one that's likely to end up in your arm rather, is the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. Okay, I think that's highly likely and getting more so. And when it comes, you must take it, right? You absolutely must take it for the sake, if not for you, but for the sake of everybody around you and those vulnerable people in our society who cannot legitimately take a vaccine. Okay? And when you see things in the news, try to put numbers in context. Try to be critical of reporting. Right? Try not to go off headlines. Try and actually look into the science behind them. And if you ever want any help with that, that's what this channel's here for. Okay? Now, I love this graphic. Okay? I love this graphic, which is kind of where we're going to finish off. Right? Which is about the efficacy of those vaccines. Now, a lot of these have got you've seen the percentages of how effective they are. Right? This is a Canadian graphic which shows then means before the vaccine was widely available, now means average number of cases reported annually in Canada from 2011 to 2015. And you can see the level of reductions. Vaccines are some of our most effective medical interventions that we have ever invented. Right? Them and sewers, right, have saved more lives and caused more an increase in more health than pretty much anything else we've ever invented as a species. They work, they are fantastic, and please, please, please take them. So there are other questions, obviously, that I have skimmed over, which is how do RNA viruses work? Also, why do we have to release people into the population and just wait for them to get COVID? Why can't we give people exposure to the COVID virus to test if the vaccine works? That is called challenge testing, and it's the subject of a different video that I will make. And how will we get the vaccines to everyone, and crucially, when? Well, again, that is something that the news is doing a much better job of reporting on, so you can check your preferred news provider for that, but it's also going to be the subject of another video. So thanks very much for listening. I hope that puts some of those numbers in context, right? And obviously do get in touch with any other questions. Thank you.